Hi everyone, how you guys going? We are getting into the depth of counseling, and you saw what we just learned in the previous video. We're starting to look at all these, what some people call basic counseling skill and other people call micro counseling skills, but they pretty much refer to the same things. So the idea here is that we start looking at specific little techniques that you could use in order to enhance your counseling practice. So while the previous video can be falling on the shortish side of things, it's only I think around 40 minutes, I wanted to do an extra video to go over again and explain and maybe even reenact a little bit of the micro counseling skills that we've been talking about in the previous video. So here we go. Let's start with joining. So the idea of joining is not that it's something very specific per se, because you can't physically join your client. The idea is to join them emotionally. And in a way, we're talking about metaphorically joining. So the idea behind joining is by doing all of these things, employing all of these micro counseling skills in order to show active listening, and as we will see in later videos, in subsequent videos, in terms of reflection of content, reflection of feelings, and summarizing, paraphrasing, all of that. So all of those ideas are to show that we are tuning in, we are sinking in, we are synchronized, we are on the same wavelength, we are joining. So that's the idea, being able to show them that we are building, and that's why I was using the picture of a bridge. We're building an emotional bridge between the client and the counselor. Because what we're saying is, we're here for you. We understand where you're coming from. We understand what is happening for you, or at least we're trying to understand. And we need to show it. That's the whole concept behind joining. Again, I wouldn't say there's necessarily very clear guidelines or very clear specific techniques in terms of how to show joining, but it's more around showing a bunch of skills, a bunch of techniques, all of them together combined in order to show that we are there for our client. Now, in terms of active listening, and that's the main reason why I wanted to do this video, because active listening has many different components within active listening as an umbrella term, as an overarching term. And there are many little techniques that can fall or can sit within this overarching category. The idea behind active listening, once more, is showing that we are paying attention, that we are listening, and we're doing so actively. We're doing so wholeheartedly. We're doing so fully immersed in the conversation, fully aware of what is happening, fully aware of what is going on for our client. And that is why it's active listening. And that is why it's different from everyday listening. I use an example in the video where you may be, checking your wristwatch, you may be checking your phone. That's listening, yes, you are listening to your friend, you are listening to whoever is talking to you, but with a client specifically, you want to be 100% committed, 100% dedicating your attention. That is why it's called active listening. Now, I've got a list of the things that we covered in the video. And I'm going to go one by one in this video. In terms of open posture is something that can be seen a little bit of, self-explanatory. But for those of you who may not be super familiarized with what open posture is, when we talk about, so open posture will fall within this idea of body language. So body language is something that we as counselors need to be really mindful of. The idea behind body language is that people will say a lot without words. And we as counselors are people, we say a lot without words. So body posture, overall, you've got something called open body posture and closed body posture, where an open body posture is inviting, is telling the client or whoever we're listening to, we're telling them, we're here for you, we are welcoming your message, we are ready to hear what you have to say. Again, we're here for you. A closed body posture is more around, I don't care what you have to say, I don't have time, I'm better than you, or all these, I guess, coming from a more negative perspective, and that is why we're saying that it's really important to have an open body posture to invite this idea of joining, building a connection between the counselor and the client. And if we are implicitly saying, I don't have time for what you're saying, or I don't care what you're saying, then you can see how it's difficult for the client to trust us and think that we really care. We really care about what they have to say. So here's an example. Open body posture, normally there's different things to consider, in social settings and things like that, but specifically within the counseling context, I would say an open body posture is something like sitting, maybe crossed legs, that's fine, with your arms usually either on the side of the legs, usually on the side of your body. It could be crossing arms, but here, like you're saying, I am listening to you. And you see how my body is facing towards, in this case, I'm talking to this device, but if we have another person, then I'll be facing the other person with my shoulders, with my head, and I'll be attentively listening, actively listening, and I'll be showing that I'm doing so. A closed body posture, on the other hand, will be something like, for example, it could be something like this. If my client is right here and I'm doing this, you can see how I'm turning the other side. I'm also saying, don't bother talking to me, I'm not here for you. It could be that, if again, this is our client, it could be that, I'm so fed up with this. Or, I'm really angry. You can see how it changes without saying much. The way we shift our body or the way we use our body can have an impact and an influence on the counseling relationship. In terms of open body posture, also keep in mind that you want to be comfortable but not too comfortable. For example, this is slightly comfortable. This is perhaps a bit too comfortable. So you can see how you have to find a balance, and you need to make sure that you are looking professional, but also looking inviting. It takes a little bit of practice. Maybe there are a few YouTube videos that you could look up. Nowadays, there's a bunch of information around social media and everything. Maybe what I would say, if you do use social media, check a few different sources, because sometimes if you guys are, for example, on TikTok, I don't know if the content available on TikTok can be 100% trustworthy. So maybe you want to cross-check the content or the information you're getting from different sources. All right, we're still within active listening. Let's think about avoiding distracting movements. Let's imagine that someone is having a chat with us. We are listening, either as a counselor or as a friend, whatever. And someone is talking to us, and suddenly we go, Achoo! Of course, we can all sneeze. Maybe something we don't have control over. But you can see how can that be a little bit disruptive. If you are talking to someone and the other person suddenly sneezes or yawns, or again, someone is talking to me and I go, what am I saying? I'm saying, I don't have time right now for this. You don't have energy right now for this. I've got other things to do, so you better hurry up. So you see the message we're sending is perhaps not the most inviting message. And if what we want is for the client to open up and feel that they've got the space and they're being listened to, then we need to be mindful of those little things and little distractive movements. No interruptions. So this is really, really important. Again, in the video I was using the example that sometimes in some cultures people will talk over other people, and that's what we do in Argentina. But in counseling sessions, You don't want to do that, because if you start talking over your client, then your client will think, this guy actually is not really caring about what I have to say, and what they want to say is more important than me. Or they could be thinking, oh wow, this person really knows what they're talking about, so I better stay quiet and listen to them because they will give me the answers. Is that what we want to do in counseling? Not really. We don't want to give people answers. We want to give people the opportunity to find the answers with us, with the counselors, through the counseling process, through the therapeutic process. If we give them the answers, then perhaps we're giving them the wrong answers, because they are the experts. We're not the experts in their own lives. We maybe have an idea of what works for them, but they know better. And the other thing is, even if we do know better, and even if we do give them the right answer, we are giving them the answer. So we are not helping the client find their own solutions and understand that they are worthy, they are capable of finding their own solutions and overcoming their issues. We're saying, you can't do it by yourself, you need me, you are dependent on me. And that's not a very productive counseling process, because you can see how the self-worth and the self-esteem will be dependent or attached to someone else, in this case, the counselor. And that usually doesn't go well in the long process. So, going back again, this idea of interruptions, it's really important. Perhaps one thing you could do is practice a little bit. Maybe after watching this video, go to your friends or family or partners or whoever you have a chance to talk to, and maybe deliberately avoid interrupting them. Or do the opposite, start interrupting them and see what is their reaction, see if they are frustrated. So do a little bit of this observation of body language and how their body language starts to shift, if at all. In terms of minimal responses, so within minimal responses, we've got a list of things. We said we've got non-verbal, semi-verbal, and verbal minimal responses. So, again, minimal responses. The idea behind minimal responses is to give a quick, short response, or more than response, I would say an interaction, to let the client know that we are there for them and that we are actually listening and we are paying attention and we are caring for what they're saying and we are understanding what they're saying. So again, minimal responses. Let's start with the first one, non-verbal. Non-verbal, of course, means not talking. So we are giving them a minimal response. It's short, we're not interrupting, but we are showing that we're there without actually saying any words. Non-verbal minimal responses. So the examples we used in the video is nodding, like saying, I am seeing you, I am paying attention to you, and I'm understanding. Now, you might have watched the video and I showed the clip from The Office with 𝓃𝒶𝑜𝓈, how he started nodding all the time, rhythmically, and he was, of course, putting a face. It's a comedy show, so he was doing that on purpose. Well, we need to be mindful that our nodding is not repetitive, it's not constant, and it's not all we're doing. And the thing is, and I remember when I was a student, when I learned this technique, I started doing this a little bit too much, and it can be distracting. So be mindful that you are doing it, but be mindful that you're not doing it too much. Maybe what you could do is record a few conversations with your friends where you're not counseling your friends, but you are practicing these active listening skills, and see if you're nodding too much. See if there's room for you to nod a little bit more. It could be that when we are listening to someone, we are doing eye contact, but when someone is talking, we may be talking to the audience, or we may be thinking, this is very common. People do that all the time. And what sometimes people do is when the client or whoever is talking is thinking, talking, and then suddenly we'll direct the eyes to the listener and then keep talking again. And then, so if we, and again, I've done this in the past myself, if the client is thinking and when they look at us, we start nodding, and then they look away and then they look at us and we start nodding, for them, while we're not nodding all the time, for them, it feels like we're nodding all the time. So that's another thing to keep in mind. In terms of semi-verbal minimal responses, we saw a few clips, a few videos in the previous video where they were mostly using or signaling that I am here, I am listening, and I understand and I care. So there's a range of examples that we could use in terms of semi-verbal minimal responses, but yeah, usually I would say it ranges from okay or I see, things like that. You can be a little bit creative, don't want to depart a bit too much from that. It also depends on your culture, on your language as well. In Spanish, we will have different mannerisms, different expressions that will convey this message that I am here, I am listening. So a few things for you to consider. In terms of verbal minimal responses, this is what I was trying to convey in the video. There's a Gelder and Gelder in their book, they do a little bit of a difference between verbal minimal responses and encourages to continue talking. I'm not sure that difference or that distinction is absolutely clear. In fact, in a few other books, they don't make that distinction. But there's a couple of things. One thing, first of all, I would say go to Gelder and Gelder. The link is available on Canvas. I would say 100% go and devour their book. It's very easy to read, very easy to follow, and illustrates all these concepts that we're using here. But they also give you scripts to show how you would be able to see these listening skills, minimal responses, and things like that. So it's really cool, very useful, a lot of practical examples. And going back to what I was saying before in terms of the minimal responses and the encouragers, here's my take on this. If we're using a verbal minimal response, it means we are listening, it means we are tuning in, it means if there's a pause, please go on. And that's what a minimal encourager, an encourager to go on does, exactly that. According to Gelder and Gelder, there will be something like, please go on, or tell me more. And that usually happens when someone is starting to talk about something that perhaps is a little bit difficult for them, perhaps it's something that they have concealed for a while, perhaps it's something that they are maybe embarrassed about. So there may be a range of reasons why they may be hesitating, or maybe they're just testing the waters unknowingly, maybe they're not openly willing, trying to test the waters to see whether you're there, whether you're understanding or whatever. But sometimes people do need these encouragers. So in terms of someone starting to say something and maybe they do a brief pause, we can say, okay, that's very interesting. Would you like to tell me more? Please continue. Please go on. So you're almost saying, I see all the things that you are telling me. I see how these things may be difficult for you, but I'm actually interested. I'm actually caring. And please, I would like to know a bit more if you don't mind. That's a message we want to say, but because it's a minimal response, which is conveyed on, please go on. In terms of the use of voice, once more, we are within active listening. We said there were many elements within active listening. So now we're looking at the use of voice. The use of voice is quite important because the idea is to use our voice, try and convey a lot of things just by the way we talk and just by the way we use our voice. What do we mean by this? So we could be talking very rapidly, and that means usually that we are stressed, we have a lot to say and we need to get it out, that we are busy and we don't really have a lot of time right now. But if we use our voice in a more, I guess, relaxed manner, in a slower pace, softer tone, then the message we are conveying is, I am here for you, I do have the time, I am interested, I want to hear what you have to say. One thing we mentioned in the video is that sometimes there's this idea of matching tone and speed. And that could be that perhaps the other person is busy, is anxious, is stressed, and they start talking very rapidly and they start thinking, or it could be that people just talk that way naturally. So what we were saying is this idea of matching and the way we use our voice. So matching is trying to match how the client talks or how they are communicating with us right now, and without mimicking, almost trying to match the speed, the voice, the intonation, and a few things in order to feel that, to make them feel that we are on the same wavelength, that we are understanding, that we are tuning in. Again, if someone starts talking very rapidly and is finding for all this information and is looking through the brain and trying to think, we as counselors can start talking a little bit faster as well. And as the session progresses, we can start slowing down to our own pace and perhaps have our own cadence. And maybe that helps our client feel a little bit more relaxed throughout the session as well. So a few things for us, or for you guys to start practicing, to play around. Maybe again, have a look at what are the different types of tones I could use. What are the different types of pitches, intonations, cadences, and things like that we could use. And what is the likely impact on our client? Again, maybe you can experiment with your friends and family, and hopefully by the end of this course they're not super fed up with you, but you can try and maybe find someone who is in a rush and see if you can match the tone of voice and speed. Or maybe you can do the opposite. See if someone is talking very, very fast and you start talking very, very slow, what's the effect? Or if they are talking very, very slow and you start talking very, very fast, what's the effect? Do a few experiments and see what works for you. And maybe you have interesting findings and you can share that with us during the live tutorials. We can also talk about the use of silence. The use of silence is super, super important. I would say, of course, active listening is really important. Within active listening, minimal responses, no interruptions, but the use of silence is key. It's another really important element. But the thing is, I already mentioned this, and this is something you probably are aware anyway. People talk about how it can be challenging for beginner practitioners or beginner counselors to respect the silence. It can be really tricky because we feel like we need to fill all the gaps and spaces, because if we don't do that, then the conversation will start falling down and our client may eventually stop and think, do you even care about what I'm saying? Here's my take on it. Stick with the silence. Make it your friend. Be comfortable sitting in silence. Again, you can try this out, but with friends it may be slightly different, because with friends friends are probably someone you are comfortable with and if there's silence, then it's something that probably happened in the past and it's not something super uncomfortable. Same with partners. I can be sitting next to my partner for longer periods of time without any of us saying anything, and it will be absolutely comfortable. But see if you can do that maybe with in a slightly different context. I'm thinking if you go to, go buy bread and start talking to the bread maker, and then suddenly there's a silence, the bread maker will look at you like, what's going on? It is a little bit weird because they're not being counseled. It's not the counseling context. But see if there's room for you to practice a little bit the use of silence. Once more, it's something that you may be comfortable with at the beginning, but the more comfortable you get to be with the use of silence, the more useful can be within counseling sessions. I'll give you a few examples. A couple of years ago, when I was starting to get into counseling kids, primary school kids, I was usually trying to fill in the voids and the gaps. And the kids will start to get used to that style. If I'll ask them a question and they didn't answer straight away, I'll ask another question, or I'll jump in and I'll try to make my question a bit more relatable. So I wouldn't let them, have a lot of time to dwell or go through their thought process. I would try to guide them as much as I could. One particular session, I remember there was a kid I was seeing. He was referred to me because he was going through a grieving process. And again, my style was almost, you could say, almost like interviewing someone, which is not really what you want to do in counseling. And the child was used to. And then at one stage, I remember thinking, I'm going to deliberately try and use more silence, because I think, again, we'll talk about critical reflection in a few weeks later down the track, but through critical reflection, I was trying to find what could I do to improve my own counseling techniques and practice. And one of those was using silence, or using more silence. And I remember during one session, I was listening attentively and holding back my own need to fill that void. I just held it, observed that, let it go, and I was staying quiet. And I was simply observing. And the client looked at me, almost thinking, are you still there? And I was watching him. So I was showing that I was listening, but I was simply giving him the time. And immediately he realized that I was paying attention, I was observing, I was interested, but I was simply waiting. And he kept talking. It was almost like, oh, you're giving me the chance. Okay, might as well. I'll continue on talking. And as we will see later on, within a Freudian concept, there's this idea of resistance, and there's many layers to get into the, unconscious, you could say. So sometimes if we are given this chance of putting up the barriers and the resistance, then we won't get to the deeper layers of our thought process. But if someone is inviting us because they're completely comfortable sitting there in silence, then we, the clients, might as well say something. And that is when this sincering and opening up process begins to unfold. So you can see how the use of silence can be really, really effective. And the other thing about the use of silence, and in general in active listening, is that it allows us the chance to observe. Because when we're talking, we are in command of the conversation. Yes, we are able to observe, but our brain has only so much capacity. And talking does take a little bit of that brain capacity or brain power. And if we are sitting there quiet but attentively listening, paying attention, we are able to pick up a lot of details and understand a little bit more about what the client is going through, and perhaps, I don't know, being observant of little details that if we're talking all the time, we may not have been aware of. For example, when someone is shifting in a chair, when someone is, for example, tapping the finger, when someone is, I don't know, maybe looking away or hesitating, or so many little things that clients do and people do that if we're not actively listening, if we were not using silence and observing, eagerly observing what they do, we may miss. And perhaps these little things are telling us more information than what the client is actually saying or giving us when they're talking. Maintaining eye contact. Maintaining eye contact is really important. And again, is part and parcel of active listening. Because if we are, and you notice when I'm talking, sometimes my eyes will go across the room because that's what people do naturally. But when we are listening, if we are directing our gaze to the person talking, our client in this case, we are showing that we are listening. If we are moving away and looking somewhere else, we are showing that we don't really care. But again, keep in mind what I said in the video. If we are using eye contact way too much, it can be a little bit intense and almost intimidating. And depending on the shape of the eyes and the shape of the face, some people have more intense gaze, some people have less intense gaze. So if you are one of those people who has a bit more of an intense gaze, you may want to be aware of that and maybe ask for some feedback, maybe from your friends, from your family, or if you're practicing, when you're practicing, maybe ask for the one who is being listened to, you know, like whoever is playing the role of the client, and see what your eyes are doing. And again, try to find that mild balance or fine balance where you are showing eye contact, not too much, not too intense as well. So it can be a little bit tricky and it varies a lot depending on the person, but yeah, that's something to consider and think about. Now here's an example. If I am listening and I am maintaining eye contact and I open my eyes and I just blink, but if I don't blink, you can see how that can be a little bit intense. So also perhaps the gesture in your in your face as well, and maybe a more softer, perhaps something you may practice with your lips as well. Take a more, I guess, relaxed approach. But also that will depend on what is the message being conveyed. If someone is talking about something funny and they're talking about an experience they had when they, I don't know, something embarrassing that allows you to show humor or seeing that as a humorous event, then you may either show, for example, a smile and maybe nodding like, I get where you're coming from. But if someone is saying something quite terrible for them, or they're talking about a distressing experience, you don't want to smile. You may want to nod a little bit, but perhaps you saw what I did before, maybe raising slightly your eyebrows, almost saying that I hear your pain. I am understanding how painful this might have been for you. And that's something that we normally do anyway. As people, we are training, interacting with other people, most of us. And when we are fully immersed in the story, in what is being told to us, we will tend to do these natural reactions where it will pretty much accompany the flow of the narrative. If someone is saying something funny, we will probably smile. If someone is saying something painful, we'll probably frown a little bit, or I guess convey that we are understanding their pain. We can also talk about the final element within active listening, and this is nonverbal behavior. Within nonverbal behavior, we said three things: matching, facial expression, and use of movement. So matching is a little bit what I was saying before in terms of use of voice. But also, it could be, in this case, because it's nonverbal behavior, it could be your body posture, it could be your body language, that you are matching what the other person is doing or saying. And the example we use in the video is if someone is, for example, nervous and is sitting on the edge of the chair, and they're, maybe a little bit nervous. I'm not saying you as a counselor will do the same thing, but you could perhaps incorporate or lean forward and maybe show that you are understanding their nervousness, or you are empathizing with the nervousness without showing that you're nervous. Because I don't know how easy it would be to talk to a counselor who's really nervous. I don't know how effective that counseling process would be. And if they're feeling more relaxed, perhaps you could lean back and maybe show that you are a bit more relaxed as well. So that's what we meant by matching the behavior with our non-verbal behavior. For example, you could, if someone is saying something really painful, you could be leaning forward and you could almost showing that you are understanding, or that you're showing understanding, because you can't really fully understand what they're saying unless you have lived it, because the experience is always unique. But at least that you're showing that you are there for them, that you are listening to them, and you're willing to understand. Even if you wouldn't really understand, you're saying, please explain it to me. I am interested. I want to know how this feels for you. And the same thing with facial expression. This is what I just mentioned before. We were talking about how if someone is saying something funny, maybe reflecting that, I guess, with a facial gesture, that we are understanding their humor, or that we are understanding their pain or their grief, or whatever it is. So those are all the elements we pretty much discussed in the previous video. I wanted to illustrate and maybe pause a little bit and maybe expand a little bit on each of these, because I think they are really important. Here's what I would say. What I would suggest is for you to try and see if you can implement this without pestering people around you, but see if you can start practicing these skills. Because you may see these skills, or you may watch this video and you may think, okay, all of these make sense. I've got it. I've done it in the past, or I've seen it done in the past. But when you are consciously doing it, it very likely will change the dynamic of what you're doing. And you don't want to come across as very conscious in what you do in counseling settings. So again, while you are not a counselor and you won't be able to provide counseling services even after finishing this course, we do encourage you to put all of these skills into practice and maybe do what I did before. Grab a list, and for example, if you think about, okay, active listening, let's try open posture, and start a conversation with a friend or with someone without telling them that you're going to be pseudo counseling them, but see if you can try an open posture or a closed posture, or even change throughout the mock-up session. And maybe after, ask for a little bit of feedback from whoever is your subject matter. Another thing you can do, and you will be doing in the live tutorial, there's something called triads, and I'll explain that in a minute. And you could be using the triads, or more likely you will be using these triads in the live tutorials to try and practice or elicit all of these different elements we've been talking about. So triads, what are triads? Again, if you look at 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 and 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈, they explain that very clearly. In one of the videos we uploaded in this week, you will see there were 3 people as well. So a triad is 3 people. 1, the client, talking. 1, the counselor, listening. And 1 is an observant. And the role of the observant is to observe how the client is talking and to observe how the counselor is counseling, to observe the dynamic. And because the observer knows that they don't need to do much because they're not the counselors, they don't need to interact at all, the brain capacity will be absolutely free and they will be able to observe and focus on more things than just the counselor. The idea of the observer is 1, looking at the client and understanding, maybe even practicing silently these counseling skills, and think, this is what I would do if I was a counselor. And then observing the counselor and how they act or react based on the client information. And that's maybe something that the observer could share as feedback for the counselor and say, you know what, you did this, but I would have done that. Or I see, I would have done this, but you actually did this, and this was really, really better because I see the impact, I see the result, whatever. So that's when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of all these technical skills or micro skills, and perhaps start reflecting and perhaps think, okay, this is what I did and this is really good, this is what I would have done and it would have been really good, or it would have been terrible. This is what the other person did and it worked really well, so maybe I can incorporate all of that. So you start thinking, oh, okay, this is how it works and this is what happens. It takes practice. For some people it's more natural, for some people it takes more practice. But I'm confident that you can get there. I'm confident that if you're thinking about pursuing a counseling role in the future, it takes a little bit of practice. And look, the reality is we can practice a lot, but the counseling setting is very special. The counseling there's nothing like the counseling setting, because if someone knows that they are a mock-up client and they are pretending to be a client and pretending to, or maybe sharing some issues, but normally when we're students and we practice these triads and the issues we share are not really very core issues or things that we have been harboring and kept hidden for a long time, and then we are almost ashamed of those things. And also, as teachers, we don't encourage students to share very heavy things because we're not really counselors in the counseling, in I guess, studying contexts. We don't want someone to be playing the role of the counselor and be overwhelmed by what another student is saying. So again, you can see how even if you're practicing the counseling context, the real one, it's very difficult to mimic. And there are many things that you think, oh, I'm practicing a lot, but I will never get this, or will never get that. They'll come when you get to that, if you get to that counseling setting, the real one. So don't feel frustrated. It's still worth practicing all of these things, being aware that they are there for you, being aware that you can use them, how you can use them, and how they can be effective through all this feedback and all the things we were saying. But yeah, knowing that all of these tools are at your disposal, so when you get to that real counseling setting, you're able to implement them naturally. So that's all I wanted to say about all of these elements. Hopefully it's a little bit more clear. Hopefully it's giving you a lot of food for thought. Hopefully it's inspiring you to start practicing all of these skills. Again, in the live tutorials, we will have scenarios where, or I guess instances where you will be able to practice all of these different techniques, and hopefully you start seeing the value in all of them. That's it for this video. That's it for this week. I hope you're enjoying the content. Once more, if you've got any feedback or any questions, you can direct them to your tutor. That's probably your first point of contact, but you can also direct them to me. I'll be more than happy to hear your thoughts and maybe have a back and forth conversation about whatever it is that you have in mind. I hope you enjoy this content, and that's it for this week.